welcome to this Wolfsburg versus Arsenal tactical analysis. This is the second leg of the Wolfsburg-Arsenal tie in the UEFA Women's Champions League quarterfinals. I want to try something a little bit different this time, and I would love feedback. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider sharing it on social media, and maybe subscribing. With that, let's get into it. Okay, so before we have a look at a scenario, I think we're good here to just quickly break down Wolfsburg's prioritization of that right-hand side. Okay, so in talking about Wolfsburg's build-up, I would kind of consider it a 3-2-3-2, although there's obviously quite a bit of flexibility to that. Okay, so Wolfsburg focused their attention on this right-hand side. That pitted Catley against Huth and Wilms. Wilms was happy to make these overlapping runs and was a big threat against Catley. Catley lacked probably the protection she'd want against this quite dynamic duo in Huth and Wilms. And then centrally, Wolfsburg would attack this space. And other than the fact that Wolfsburg typically attack in quite a direct style, when they were creating these crossing opportunities, the forwards, so for example, Jean Statier was coming off her left wing and she was often trying to position in the box, sometimes even as that central striker, but then also Wasmuth, Ruud, and potentially even some of these centre midfielders in Latvain and Oberdorf were looking to get in the box and provide an attacking threat. So strong was the dominance of this right-hand side pair for Wolfsburg that Arsenal chose to swap over Heath and McCabe. McCabe obviously having played as a left back quite a lot, she has that kind of tenacity, or at least I'd say a lot more tenacity and defensive solidity to bring to defending this left-hand side. Although I think the real defensive improvement for Arsenal was more subbing off Heath and bringing on Food, because this created greater pressure when it came to pressing higher up the pitch. Okay, so another thing that I wanted to focus on in this space, again, was the movement of the centre forwards as well as the centre midfielders. Okay, so sometimes you'd get players, whether it was Ruud or Wasmuth, dropping. That was to try and distract, whether it was centre midfielders or defenders for Arsenal, and they're looking to try and just create gaps. So whilst you're defending, your issue tends to be, other than when you have like an obvious 1v1, such as here with Catley versus Huth, it's okay, let's say Wasmuth comes across and then she's kind of sitting in this space between Ruben Moy and Catley. Does Ruben Moy keep coming across, or does she try and stay more central and with Williamson to prevent this kind of gap opening up between herself and Williamson? Those kind of decisions, Wolfsburg were really good at making these runs out into wide spaces. So for example, here with Wilms, let's say she makes this overlapping run, Catley will want to drop a little bit more, anticipating the fact that there'll be a ball out wide, and that'll obviously, in this case, I guess, create a chance for Wasmuth. But Wolfsburg were also good at using Oberdorf and Latvain to make runs. So for example, Ruud could drop and then you'd have Oberdorf making a run in here. Wasmuth is occupying the other centre back. So now Catley is obviously aware of this run. She wants to drop to prevent the easy through ball on her outside to Oberdorf, but she's got this issue out wide of her as well as inside, and doesn't really want to allow Huth to be able to just freely roam into the box. Even if Ruben Moy comes across, you still end up with an issue centrally as well. So they were really good at having their centre midfielders as well make these runs into the half spaces between centre back and full back to try and create a bit of disorganisation. A scenario, so we're going to have a look at a period in the 15th to 16th minute. Arsenal has just taken a corner, it was defended, and now Wolfsburg are playing the ball out from Schultz, who kicks it long. They're building up in this 4-1-2-3 shape, and the things I wanted to highlight here start with Ruud. Yes, she's the CAM, but they drop her during this deep build-up. Here she's a lot deeper than typical, but she starts deeper so she can try and help the centre midfielders in Latvain and Oberdorf to be able to beat the Arsenal press. Okay, so here the Arsenal press is set up as a 3-2-3-2 with Catley moving in from left back into a left CDM position and Little moving into a CAM position. Whilst they're set up in this 3-2-3-2 here, typically Arsenal were setting up in more of a 4-4-2 shape that would drop into a 4-2-3-1 with Miedema here dropping into a CAM position. But on this occasion, likely Little was drawn deeper by the fact that Ruud had moved much higher for Arsenal, deeper for Wolfsburg, and so Little was trying to maintain the coherence of the press by trying to track her. That then creates space either side of Marnham, which is what Catley was trying to fill. Unfortunately, after winning the header, Catley's ball goes over Little, because she's ironically little, and then Huth is able to capitalise from a pass from Ruud. Okay, so Huth is able to run relatively uncontested down this right-hand side, again, because Wubben-Moy doesn't want to come out into this left-hand side channel to defend against Huth, because she wants to try and keep this distance between herself and her centre-back partner relatively narrow, just as we mentioned during the earlier part of the tactical analysis. And so instead, Catley has to do that job. Obviously, she was initially in that left-centred defensive midfield position, so she has had to cover a lot of ground to get into this position. It's a great example of the Wolfsburg dynamism and counter-attacking ideals. You've got your far-sided wide midfielder here coming narrow. I want to put emphasis on that, considering where Moritz is. It's all of 5, 6, 7 yards off her, and then you have your other two forwards in this case as well, in Wasmuth and Ruud, looking to try and break into the box for this cross as well. Okay, so Arsenal were able to defend the cross, and then Wolfsburg set up to basically, siege the Arsenal box. But this is a really good example of those tactics I mentioned earlier with the tactics board. Okay, so you've got both of your centre midfielders here towards this left-hand side. You've got your CAM centrally, but then you've got your fullbacks higher up the pitch. So we've got Wilm, and then near side, we've got Rausch, also high up the pitch. But I want you to pay attention to this space here. So currently it's being occupied by John Statier, but you'll see that multiple runs will go through this space, and they're looking for that moment when Arsenal just don't pick up the player in there. So at the moment, John Statier's in there, but you'll potentially have one of your centre midfielders, maybe Oberdorf or Latvein, make a run in there and potentially create a little bit of disorganisation for that Arsenal backline. Also note the position of your fullbacks this high up the pitch, really great for counter-pressing. Just as mentioned, you've now got one of your centre midfielders here in Oberdorf, your other one in Latvein here covering for her fullback, who's a little bit higher up, and the run by Oberdorf into this space, as I mentioned, where John Statier has drawn the attention of both the fullback, but then also one of your centre midfielders. But is your centre midfielder here in Marnham actually aware? Is she aware of the fact that Oberdorf is making this run in behind her? Very unlikely. And so now you've created an issue both for the centre midfielder and fullback here on this right hand side channel for Arsenal, and then also for the centre back being drawn out here by the run of Wasmuth away from her centre back partner, and ultimately this is creating a serious defensive issue on this right hand side for Arsenal. Okay, so the run on that left-hand side for Wolfsburg with Oberdorf, it doesn't come to anything, but you can see how Wolfsburg are looking to attack that space. And so you see kind of a similar thing here happening on the right-hand side. So Hendrik is looking to play it out to Wilm, whilst the wide midfielder on this side in Huth has tucked inside, causing a dilemma for Catley, who also wants to come inside so that she can stay with her player. But she's obviously aware of the fact that this is an issue. The fact that Wilm is here in tons of space is a serious issue. It allows Wilm, if she receives a good ball from Hendrik, to be able to try and attack this space. There's a lot of distance that needs to be covered either by Heath or by Catley to be able to stop Wilm. Again, note far side, John Statier, who's going to be looking as this play progresses up this right hand side to be trying to get into the box more central so that she can try and attack any crosses with the other two centre forwards. This is just really great here, because whilst we showed the example on that left-hand side and the fact that Oberdorf made that late run as they created a gap for her, we see her here again making that late run. You've got the Arsenal fullback as well as also the wide midfielder and centre midfielder all drawn across, looking to try and put pressure on the fullback and the wide midfielder for Wolfsburg, and that creates just a huge space for the third runner to be able to run in blindside of these other three players, and then that puts Wubben-Moy into just a terrible position, because again she wants to try and stay with her centre-back partner, and really should be, because otherwise she'll have two players to try and defend, that being Williamson. But she really has to go out here. And Williamson does a really good job initially staying, but then covering across to try and block Oberdorf. But this is a really great example here of the movement of Wolfsburg to create an attacking opportunity here. So before we see the next part of this scenario, I think it'll be good to just quickly go over how Arsenal built up. A bit more of a focus on the second half, but slight mention of the first half too. Okay, so with regards to Arsenal, the key tactic that I wanted to focus on was their splitting of their centre midfielders in a 2-4-1-3. They used this same formation in the first half, but I'd say that the centre midfielders were a lot narrower, and therefore it was a little bit easier for Wolfsburg in their 3-2-3-2 press or 4-1-3-2 press to be able to clog up that deep progression and kind of force the likes of Zinsberger or the centre backs into playing those long balls into Miedemar. Miedemar, who's typically tracked. In this situation, we've got Oberdorf, but it could just as well have been Janssen. In the second half, I think that the fact that they had, whether it was Knobs or Marnham, splitting as well as Little, allowed there to be this kind of channel centrally. So the likes of Miedemar and Paris could operate in here. Paris can drop from her right wing kind of position and drop into the central space as well as Miedemar. Typically not both going to do it. Arsenal were trying this, firing the ball through the lines to forwards earlier in the first half, but it wasn't really working. And I think definitely having these centre midfielders split to prevent Wolfsburg being quite as narrow and congesting that centre of the park as they were in the first half helped. It meant, the likes of Miedemar, when she was dropping to take the ball to feet rather than to her chest or head, and typically she was tracked, it meant that the likes of Ruud or maybe Wasmuth or Uther Johnson couldn't also collapse and force a turnover, typically in quite a dangerous position when it was happening in the centre of the park, and obviously Wolfsburg would then counter. Another benefit of Arsenal having their centre midfielders split like this, I believe, and having the forwards, Paris and Miedemar, typically dropping into this space, is that it kind of forces Wolfsburg into wanting to narrow a bit, just so that the wide midfielders can try and support their centre midfielders and kind of clog up this space, whilst these the centre forwards in this 4-4-2 shape are pulled out wide, and that creates more space for the likes of Moritz as well as also Catley. So these two were a lot more involved in the play, attacking wise or in possession in the second half, and then you could end up with these really nice switches from the centre backs into the full backs or into a wide midfielder, and then you've got your full back supporting. So it was a lot better set up for Arsenal to be able to progress the ball in the second half. Okay, so with that explainer, then we've got the continuation of this scenario. So Wolfsburg have just tapped down that right hand side. Ruben Moy has helped to clean that up, and now Zinsberg is playing it long, looking to try and hit Miedemar. We've also got Wolfsburg in, I mostly classified it as like a 4-1-3-2. So you'd have Wasmuth and Ruud up top, and then behind them Lapvine and Oberdorf. Generally speaking, they're wanting to try and put pressure on the centre midfielders of Arsenal, typically Arsenal building up in that 2-4-1-3 shape. Yeah. So as I was saying, Miedemar receives this long ball, but the issue for her is that she's almost always hounded by a defender. One, she's hounded by a defender, so she'll find it really hard to turn out into either of these spaces. But then even if she does go back, you've got defenders for Wolfsburg looking to come back and put pressure. Often in the first half, that was a serious issue for Arsenal. Okay, so I felt like this scenario was really good because one, it showed the tenacity of McCabe during the press here, as well as Marnham following up, but then also the counter pressing and then counter attacking of Wolfsburg. Wolfsburg are exceptionally good when it comes to decision making during counter attacks. I thought this would be a good scenario to show just because it demonstrates the tactics that we mentioned before with the centre midfielders running into those spaces, but a little bit more obvious. So we've got here with Lapwine making that run. And then again, the same thing that we saw with the example earlier in the video, you end up now with Ruud in this scenario making that late run again, blind side here of Marnham in this case, into this channel here between the centre back and full back for Arsenal. And there's just so much space here for Ruud to be able to attack. Arsenal are able to somewhat deflect this attack and try and clear the ball, but this was part of the problem that they faced. And now Miedema is trying to act as the platform for the counter-attack for Arsenal, but she's immediately pressed here by Oberdorf. And then you also have Rausch, your left back, quite high up to try and help with the counter-press in case Miedema decides to go to her left, and even if she goes towards her right, well, you've got your other fullback here in Wilm, and you also have Latvine coming back. So you can see how with this kind of counter pressure, very difficult in the first half, especially for Arsenal to be able to break out. Here we have Nikita Paris, one of our forwards, having dropped. Initially, she started a little bit deeper here, and now she's tried to drop through this gap between the two centre midfielders. At this point, I would say that Wolfsburg were playing almost a 4-3-3 though, especially once Blomqvist comes on and she plays as the left winger, and then you can have Huth drop into a centre midfield position, playing like a left centre midfield. But one of Nikita Paris or Miedema were looking to try and drop and provide a through ball for the defensive unit, typically the centre-backs, to be able to play through the lines of Wolfsburg. At this point, it is still a 4-4-2. Alternatively, Ruben Moy here also had the option of being able to play that long ball out into the wide spaces, whether that was out towards this left-hand side with Food and Catley, or towards this right-hand side here with Moritz. Okay, so Wolfsburg did what Wolfsburg do and tried to counterattack, and we see that same channel that I mentioned before. In this scenario, it's due to the fact that they have kind of been caught in transition with Oberdorf looking to try and attack from her right centre midfield position. That's why there's this space here rather than the splitting of the two centre midfielders. But the main point is more the fact that Arsenal centre-backs here, Williamson, is looking to try and play through the lines into Miedema in this case. And here we have Nikita Paris, who's dropped again just as she had a little bit earlier. Okay, in trying to keep this video short, that's where we're going to end it. If you want to see a full tactical summary, please have a look in the description as well as the comments down below. If you enjoy the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider sharing it on social media and maybe subscribing. And with that, we're out.